Incision complete, suction ready.
Suction active, vitals stable.
Proceeding to the lesion.
The Oathbreaker Dr. Victor Hale was the youngest department head in St. Augustine Hospital's 127-year history. At 34, he commanded the neurosurgery wing with the precision of a conductor and the ego of a man who had never been told no. Patients called him a miracle worker. Colleagues called him brilliance. Nurses called him God complex behind his back, though never to his face. Victor had grown up poor in a Rust Belt town where his mother cleaned houses and his father drank himself to death by 40. Medicine had been his escape velocity, the scholarship, the white coat, the first-class cabin on flights to medical conferences. He'd buried his past so completely that sometimes he forgot where he'd come from. What he never forgot was the feeling of want, of watching other boys get new bikes while he walked to school in shoes held together with duct tape, of being invisible in rooms where money moved like weather systems. By his 5th year as department head, Victor had perfected 3 things: surgical technique, academic publication, and a side business that would have cost him his license. It began with a consultation. A pharmaceutical executive named Richard Vance had approached him after a conference in Miami. They'd talked over 30 cocktails about the frustration of clinical trials, how promising drugs died in phase 3 because the wrong patients were selected, how data could be guided. "You're doing brain surgeries on patients with early-stage gliomas," Vance had said, swirling his drink. "What if some of them were part of a trial? Unofficially. What if the outcomes helped us help thousands of future patients?" Victor had laughed. Then he'd named a price. Within a year, he had enrolled 47 patients in unregistered trials. He selected candidates carefully: elderly patients with no family, immigrants with limited English, the poor who were grateful for any attention. He altered their records to fit trial criteria, administered experimental compounds during surgery, and reported the results to Vance's company in encrypted emails. The money went to an offshore account, a condo in Grand Cayman, a collection of vintage watches that he never wore, only photographed for an Instagram account under a false name. He told himself it was victimless. The patients received better care, cutting-edge treatments, his personal attention. The drugs worked more often than they failed. He was advancing science while building the security his childhood had denied him. What he didn't count on was Maya Torres. Maya was a third-year nursing student assigned to his wing for a 6-month rotation. She was 24, sharp-eyed, and the daughter of a malpractice attorney. Victor almost rejected her application. He preferred trainees who were grateful, intimidated, quiet. But the dean had insisted. Maya noticed things. She noticed that patient 7B's charts listed a glioma in the left temporal lobe, but the MRI films in the light box showed a right-sided lesion. She noticed that certain patients received preoperative medications that weren't logged in the hospital system. She noticed that Dr. Hale took his laptop into the sterile corridor during long surgeries, typing with gloved hands, and that he always cleared his browser history afterward. Most of all, she noticed that 3 of his miracle recovery patients had died within 6 months of discharge, and their deaths were recorded as unrelated causes by a coroner who golfed with Richard Vance. Maya began keeping her own records: photographs of charts, voice memos of conversations overheard in elevators, a spreadsheet tracking the experimental patients, cross-referenced with public clinical trial databases that showed no matching studies. She told herself she was being paranoid. Dr. Hale was a legend. The hospital's board loved him. She was a nursing student with 47,000 in debt and no job prospects if she made enemies. Then she met Eleanor Voss. The evidence. Eleanor was 71, widowed, living alone in a subsidized apartment. She'd come to St. Augustine with headaches and memory problems. Victor diagnosed a low-grade glioma. Operable, he said. Before we continue, please subscribe to join this amazing storytelling family. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Thank you. Let's continue. With excellent prognosis, he'd personally supervise her case. What he didn't tell Elena was that she was patient 12 in Vance's latest trial. The tumor was actually a benign meningioma, easily treatable with radiation. The surgery would implant a slow-release capsule of an untested Alzheimer's drug that Vance's company hoped to repurpose for cancer treatment. Maya found Eleanor crying in the pre-op bay. The older woman had changed her mind. She wanted a second opinion. She wanted to go home. Victor convinced her to stay. He sat on her bed, held her hand, spoke about his own mother who died because she was too afraid to trust doctors. "I won't let that happen to you," he promised. "You're safe with me." Maya watched from the nursing station. She saw the relief on Eleanor's face. She saw Victor's smile, the genuine warmth that made patients adore him, that made juries believe him, that made the world see a healer instead of a man who had learned to perform compassion like a second language. Eleanor's surgery was scheduled for Thursday. Maya made her decision on Tuesday night, in her studio apartment, drinking coffee she couldn't afford. She called her father. The investigation took 14 months. Maya's evidence, charts, recordings, financial records obtained through subpoena, unraveled a network that extended far beyond Victor Hale. 3 pharmaceutical executives, 2 hospital administrators, a medical journal editor who'd published falsified studies, a FDA reviewer with a gambling problem and a new boat. Victor hired the best defense attorney in the country. He argued that he was a whistleblower himself, that he'd been investigating the pharmaceutical companies, that the unregistered trials were his attempt to expose corruption from within. He cried on the stand when describing his difficult childhood, his imposter syndrome, his desperate need to prove himself. The jury deliberated for 4 days. They found him guilty on 43 counts of fraud, 12 counts of assault, the experimental surgeries, and 3 counts of manslaughter. The judge called his crimes a betrayal of the deepest trust society places in any profession and sentenced him to 37 years. Victor served 11 years before dying of pancreatic cancer in a federal medical center. He refused treatment from the prison doctors, insisting they were incompetent. He wrote a memoir that was never published, blaming everyone except himself, the pharmaceutical companies that corrupted him, the hospital that exploited his talent, the nursing student who destroyed his life. Maya Torres became a nurse practitioner, specializing in medical ethics. She testified before Congress about clinical trial transparency. She never stopped feeling guilty about Eleanor Voss, who had survived the surgery but suffered irreversible cognitive damage, living her final years in a nursing home, unable to remember her own name. St. Augustine Hospital paid $89 million in settlements and reorganized under new leadership. Richard Vance served 3 years and opened a consulting firm advising medical startups on regulatory navigation. The vintage watches were auctioned to fund a patient advocacy foundation. The Cayman condo became a recovery center for victims of medical fraud. And in Rust Belt towns across America, young people still became doctors. Some to heal, some to escape, some without knowing which was which, until the choice was already made. The oath. In the Federal Medical Center, days before he died, Victor asked for a chaplain, not for prayer, but to hear him recite something he'd memorized in his first week of medical school, before he'd learned that oaths could be spoken without meaning them. First, do no harm. He wept then, for the first time since his sentencing. Not for his victims, the chaplain would later say, but for himself, for the life he'd built and lost, the reputation he'd crafted and shattered, the boy from the Rust Belt who'd finally gotten everything he wanted and found it tasted like poison. The hospital that had trained him still hangs his graduation photograph in a basement hallway near the laundry facilities. No one has asked to remove it. No one looks at it either. It simply hangs there, gathering dust. A face that was once familiar, becoming gradually, mercifully forgotten.